start off, as we plan a project, I want to talk about what an MVP is, what that stands for. Does anybody know what MVP stands for?
Minimum viable product.
Yeah, minimum viable product, right? So a minimum viable product is what exactly? If I'm not sure, I can Google it, right? A minimum viable product essentially is the version of the thing that you'd like to build that has running features that are representative of how those features are generally supposed to work, such that the people that you intend to use your app can get a sense of how the app works and can see whether the app is something that they want to continue building, right? Why do we have this notion of minimum viable products? Why not just have a sense of everything that I need to do, and then I need to get that done? So we used to do this a lot. This was called waterfall development. At least it got that name. The waterfall model was this idea that every single project was going to have these linear sequential phases. So like I might decide to make a project that involves tracking everything that's in my pantry, texting my roommates when something is low in the pantry, and then recommending a grocery store at a price for the missing item, right? And so I decide that on Monday, I'm gonna get the whole pantry inventory stuff figured out. And I plan that out with my client, right? And then on Tuesday, I'm gonna integrate my text messaging stuff and whatever kind of service I need to handle texting. And then on Wednesday, I'm gonna finally bring in all of the grocery store data and map that according to like my object model of whatever items are on the shelves, right? And so then I get a contract drawn up from clients that like, I'm gonna do 3 days worth of work and then I'm gonna return them all of those features, right? But then we might find stuff out as we're building the project that like maybe between getting requirements to actually verifying the implementation, we realize that we don't really care about text messaging at all, right? That like just managing a pantry app and everybody going and visiting the app and getting push notifications from the app itself feels far more modern and less intrusive than text messaging, and people don't like text messaging. But if I'm under waterfall development, I'm stuck in this situation where I've already planned out these steps and I have to execute every single step that I've planned out because I've got a contract to work under. And so this created like situations where a studio would build something for a client over like 2 to 6 months and then bring them a list of features that were now obsolete for the business space that the client like had to pay for but didn't feel good about because technically what they had asked for was given, but between when the asking and the giving happened, a lot of things changed, right? So to handle change, we have this other idea. A bunch of programmers who build stuff for a lot of different people got together over the course of like a weekend. These are some really kind of important names in programming, especially a couple of decades ago. Like on this list are people that came up with like ideas that are like big capital I ideas that people still work with. Some of those ideas are contained in this document, which is very, very small. This is the manifesto for what's called agile software development. And this was a style of software development that I'd say most shops are trying to use some version of or some ideas from to kind of be an antidote to this notion of I need to work head down for 3 months hoping that this stale list of features is good enough. This is about collaborating, right? So, and they actually have these values, right, where the things on the left they consider more valuable than the things on the right. Although there's value on both sides, right? They're just deciding that if we have to prefer one of these, we're gonna always prefer the first one. So Agile is about preferring individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? So making sure that each time you're making something, you're thinking about who you're making it for and what things they need to do in the application very specifically. It also is about prioritizing working software over documentation. So as opposed to writing a list of to-dos and making sure that that list is perfect, probably better to dive in and prove that I have an idea of what to do by quickly arriving at like a working prototype of that and let that prototype kind of document itself in terms of what it's supposed to be. Not because documentation is not important, but because if I had a weekend to get something done, I'd rather present running code than some written ideas about that code. Collaboration over contract negotiation. This one kind of struck directly at the waterfall mentality, right? The idea that we'd rather have conversations with our clients over the course of weeks than months, right? I'd rather talk to somebody every Tuesday about how the project is and is it still close to what you wanted and are we still on timeline and are there new features we need to consider and do we need to reprioritize the features in our backlog? Are we ahead of schedule this week or are we behind schedule this week? And frequently checking in so that as business needs change, the software can adapt to that change immediately. And we consider that more important than like deciding what all the work is up front, right? So as we want to have this agile mindset, it's really all about making sure that we're there to respond to whatever happens, as opposed to trying to like set out all of the steps, right? But we still want to have some steps so that we know what our baseline footing is, right? So there are tools that teams use to help them kind of stay on track with this. One way that Agile really succeeds is when everybody on a team or involved with a project is clear about what the idea currently of the project's next steps are. And for that, we have various tools that we can use to try to stay somewhat agile in sticking to a basic MVP. So what I want to talk about today is planning a project. I want to talk about tracking a project's progress using something resembling an agile methodology or mindset, and dealing with this notion of not hurrying, but moving slowly and deliberately through the things that matter on the project. So I guess the good place to start is probably here in our project guidelines. And there's two sets of guidelines. There's the guided project ones, which are called ALT, and then there's the non-guided ones. In these guidelines, right, I want to stress that there's not a ton of stuff being asked of us right here, right? We have active record that we need to get under our fingertips. I'd say that's our primary goal, right? And we're gonna use that active record in service of our secondary goal, which is literally the features on this project. And so we wanna focus on those features that are gonna keep us close to that active record machinery so that we can really use this project to show off how this new tool that we're learning to use really works. So in this option one, there's this notion of accessing a database using active record. They talk about a minimum requirement of 3 models, including a join model, and that means that they want you to use a many-to-many relationship, partly because what we're going to learn about this week as we get more practice with active record is how those associations can work when we start chaining them together, right? So if I have, I don't know, let's say that there's a director, right, who reviews another director's movie. And in a review, we're going to refer to the movie that's being reviewed on one side, and we're going to refer to the director that's doing the reviewing on the other side, so that many directors could review many movies, right? I could even draw a relationship directly between a given movie and the director that directed that movie, and then I could have 2 different ways that a director connects to a movie. Active record will support that kind of stuff. At minimum, we want to have 3 tables with a many-to-many relationship. You'll see here that these first instructions are the same, whether you're making the command line style app, which is heavier on presenting a user interface through the command line, right? Using gets chomp maybe to get a number that responds to something that you've displayed on a menu, and then based on the number that the user gives you, calling a method that uses active record to do something with your data. That's the command line option down here. Up here, you might just have some models and methods written where you could get into a pry session and show off work that you've done on data that you've gotten from somewhere else. And they mention here that it can be either from website scraping or an API or a CSV. I think most projects tend to go the API route. This is a link to easy access APIs. So for this demonstration, I think I'm gonna approach this in terms of like one of these APIs to try to get that into my model domain so that we can kind of work together with some of the things that you'll encounter in those API labs too. Basically, what I'd like to do is figure out off of this README, what are the models I can start with? What is my model domain going to be? What kind of information, if any, do I need from the outside? And then once I've figured that stuff out, I want to collect the features that I'm trying to build into what we call user stories, right? A user story is just a simple thing that I'd like to do as a user of the app, and usually there's some sort of reason that it's going to benefit my life that I have this like user story or this wish for what the app can do for me. So how do we plan a project? We need to decide on a model domain, right? We need to think about information that either I care about or that I'm academically interested in or that would solve a problem of mine or that I find entertaining, some sort of model domain that sparks my interest in some sort of way. So if my goal was to get information from an API, there is this Marvel API, there's an astrology API, we got some D&D. This is kind of cool, Songkick, concert data. That might be kind of nice. Football data, anime API. There's also, I know this for a fact, there's a Google Books API. I might play around with the Google Books API because I've used that before. I go to using the API. This is like documentation for an API. So let's say that my model domain is going to be related to books, that I want to use this API, this interface to access information about books that Google has stored. I want to use that information like hash objects that might come from Google. I want to turn those hash objects into objects representing books in a database, right? So what's a many-to-many relationship around books that I could mess around with? Perhaps I have an application that knows how to tag a book with a given tag, right? If I think the book is funny, or if it's scary, or if it's family friendly, or if it's good bedtime reading, or if it's good for a train or a plane, or something like that. So a tag could be applied to many books, right? And a book could also carry more than one tag. So I think I want to have like a tag class and a book class, and then as a join, I'd like to have like a tag application or a tag assignment or something like that. Let's see, not this one. This one here. So if I have a model domain, I might decide here that I have something like books, tags, tag assignments. And then I want to draw out my schema somehow, right? So there's various tools that we could use for this on the web. If I decide to search real quick for like schema design, usually I end up doing this like twice a year. The one I'm using now most of the time is this first one, dbdiagram.io. But what this lets you do is hop into a diagram very quickly that's like sort of set out for you. So it demonstrates with the syntax how various tables could be joined together. Once I've decided on a model domain, I want to immediately get to some sort of whiteboard, right? Whether I do it digitally like this so I can keep an artifact like on my computer so I can reference it in a window, or whether I just want to go to the whiteboard itself. I need to reckon with my data before I write any code. Because if I get into this certain trap that people can get themselves into, where I'm starting to write code, but I don't fully understand what my models are, how they're related together, and what specific fields the tables representing the models need to have, then I can overload my brain when I'm trying to code. So my whole goal is to not like overload myself. So I have this notion of books. And then I have this notion of tags. I'm thinking a tag would have like an ID and a name. Notice I'm not just writing the names of tables here to like draw chicken feet between them anymore. We've got tables, right? We understand what SQL is. We kind of know that we're going to have active record migrations. This is just a habit that I'm in at this point. So a book is going to have an ID. It's going to have like a title. It's probably going to have an author. Might have a description. I think we can take a closer look at the API, right? What's the information that I'm going to have access to from this like web resource that I intend to get this book data from? That's going to drive something over here. This table might be fuzzy yet. But tags, I can decide for myself. Like the tag will have a name. Beyond that, I don't think the tag means anything, right? It can just say, you know, fantasy or horror or romance or whatever, right? And then in here I can say tag assignments. And if I'm going to be really accurate, I'll make these table names lowercase because that's how they're going to actually live in the database. So tag assignments, right? I'm intending this to be a join table that makes it so that many tags and many books can be associated across each other. So what fields do I need in this join table? Book ID. Yeah, we need a book ID, because each row in this table is going to link one book, and then a tag ID to one tag. Now I can draw some chicken feet. But it really just underscores the stuff that's already implied, right? Because the foreign key is on the thing that belongs. So now under this, right, I might also write some other notes. I might say something like has many tag assignments. Because that's something that's true about a book. I might say that a tag has many tag assignments. Or sorry, a tag has many. Yeah. They both have many of the middle. And what's the opposite of has many?
Belongs to.
Belongs to. So we could say that a tag assignment belongs to a book. And belongs to a tag. We could remember from like week 1 and 2 that if these were like in objects, right, in Ruby, we'd probably have like a tag assignment object hanging onto a book object and hanging onto a tag object. And then if I'm a book looking for what tags I have, then I'm going like, hey, what are the tag assignments that have me on it as the book? And then from that tag assignment, I could get across the chain to the other tag, right? So once I've got some sort of notion of what my table space is going to be, then at that point, we've figured out our relationships, we figured out our model domain, we figured out generally like what table fields we'll have. If I go here to this book API, they give you right off the bat, like, I think, some URLs you can play with. Yeah, you can find the volume ID, bookshelf ID, user ID, working with volumes. Okay, so you can perform a volumes search. And it looks like if I go to this address here, to googleapis.com books, v1 is the version of the interface that they've made public to me here. And then volumes, I'm looking for actual books on their API. And then there's a question mark in the URL here. So in my search to figure out what it means to be a book from this API, I've reached like this kind of web concept here. In a URL, if you have a question mark, that means that the URL is over and that now some user provided information is going to begin. Right? So let's say that I was looking for, I don't know, like a bulldog rolling down a hill. And I found like a link on YouTube that I liked. And I got this thing of like a bulldog rolling down a hill. Now, if you look at this URL up here and not the dog rolling down the hill, although why would you? I can narrate what's happening with the URL. In the URL, it's youtube.com/watch, and then there's a question mark. And after the question mark, it says v equals 5AL, 5T, etc., right? I'm guessing that's the video's ID, like as like a string of characters. And V equals is like video equals that ID. Now, I think that roll was probably the best one, right? 15 seconds, 16 seconds? That's a cute roll, right? So here's a thing you can also do. You can put ampersands in between query strings. I could say like and T equals 16. And now if I go here, the starting time for the video is 16 seconds. I can isolate just that roll that I liked from the video, right? So if I was gonna send somebody like a whole episode of a show on YouTube, maybe I take it to like the 8-minute and 40-second mark when the quote that I really care about happens. But that's happening in the URL, right? Via this notion of the query string. So anything after a question mark is like keys and values, just like in a hash. And the key that Google wants here is called Q. And I'm guessing that Q is for like query, right? What are we looking for in their database of books? And then Q equals search plus terms. So I think we can look for multiple words, but instead of spaces, we'll have to use plus characters. So if this API was what I wanted to use, I might start by figuring out from the documentation what's a URL I can visit, and then attempting to like just take a stab at it. So we have volumes, question mark, Q equals. Somebody give me like a book search term real quick. An author or a title or a topic. Vonnegut, great. Now, I've got this thing installed in my Chrome browser called JSON Viewer. And if you don't have JSON Viewer enabled, then things can look weird. I'm not going to remove it from Chrome because it's going to make this whole thing just look like a big wall of single like size text. JSON Viewer puts it in a tree where I can like click on these arrows and I can collapse or expand it, and I can see the tree like nicely indented, right? So this response from the Google API, and API just stands for Application Programmer Interface. So like as a programmer who wants access to this data that Google has on books, Google has given me an interface, right, a pattern of a URL that I can go to and expect information to come back based on how I've asked for it. So I searched for Vonnegut. They've found 2,824 books with Vonnegut somewhere in the title or description or the author. So here's a volume. Title, Kurt Vonnegut. Subtitle, letters. So letters of Kurt Vonnegut. Named one of the best books of the year. Okay, that's one. Can I find another thing with title? Yeah, more volume info here, right? So every time we have one of these objects at this nesting level, it looks like we have a volume of a book. And it looks like each volume of a book has a kind and an ID and an E tag and a link to just that one volume's info. And then under volume info, we find stuff about like the title and the authors and a description of this book. So I could totally use this API to like get information stored, and I could totally get title, author, description information. So I feel confident now that my plan for my schema is okay. And now that I've also talked to this API through the browser, later on when I have to do it in Ruby, I'm confident that at least there's some there that like I can get to the other side of this URL and there's information. So if I start failing to get it in Ruby, I know that it's just the syntax that I'm using and not that the information isn't at the destination. So in terms of like wanting to use API info, this is one strategy you could do. I'd call this a technical spike, where I've gone to the API's documentation, I've quickly hunted down what looks like a useful URL, I've gone to that URL and figured out that there's information there that I can play with. So in less than like 15 minutes, I've made a decision about, yes, I can use information from this API. If I didn't get information from this in a certain amount of time, like 15 or 30 minutes, I might move on to another API, because I'm not gonna like spin my wheels all day just trying to get at a source of information. This is once again, if I'm doing the API approach, there is another approach that I can take where I'm not using an API, but where I'd have to be much more involved in my command line interface, right? So I'm either gonna get deep into the data and the back end of it, or I'm gonna get deep into like taking good care of the user and the front end of it. And throughout this week in lessons, I'm gonna try to show an approach that goes after both. So whatever you're working on, you can get something useful out of this. So in terms of planning this and being like laser focused, now that I know that I've got these table fields and relationships set up, I want to get very specific about some user stories for my application, right? So user stories mean what is a feature, right, from the perspective of the user who wants to use that feature. So user stories for an app like this might involve, like, as a user, I want to view all books that have been tagged funny, right? Or scary, or smart. Maybe those are the categories that I really think about. Like those are the first three that like would prove that I can do some tagging. And that also kind of constrains the features that I build, right? I don't need to build more than like 3 tags in a tags table in order to fulfill this feature. So I've like kind of narrowed the scope of my work in the story here. But I also haven't finished this story. Why do I want to view all the books that have been tagged one of these 3 things? So I can plan my reading based on my mood. And I can also say, as a user, I want to view all the books in the database alphabetized by title, so I can browse like a virtual shelf. A lot of times having this "so I can" at the end like helps you to figure out why you're writing this story, right? I don't think that they're necessarily required for you to write a decent user story, but to write a really good user story, you need to talk about who is the one using the app. Are they like just a general user? Are they some sort of special user you've created for your app, like an admin? Or if you had like a commerce app, you might have as a buyer versus as a seller, right? Generally, as a user is a catch-all for the first part of a user story. The middle of the user story talks about something specific that you'd like your app to be able to accomplish, right? And when I have something very specific, I can almost think of like a method that I would write in a class. Like I could think of class book dot by title, like giving me an alphabetized list of books by title, right? Or I could say something like book.by tag, and I could pass in a string representing a tag, and that maybe that class method gives me something back. So I've got a specific user story that like one single responsibility method might be able to help me accomplish in my code. And then finally, I have a rationale for doing that, so I can identify and empathize with how this app might improve somebody's life. So both of these are about viewing things that are in the database, right? But the other thing I'd like us to think about this week on these projects is CRUD, right? We want to not just be able to read, which is the R in CRUD, but we also want to be able to create and update and delete records, right? To show that we have gotten practice on all of the nice things that Active Record lets us do, right? We can call object.update, we can call object.assign attributes, object.save, and I'd like us to get practice on those things. So maybe as a user, I'd like to do something about creating a tag. As a user, I'd like to, or let's see, am I creating a new tag, like a new category, or am I creating a new tag assignment? Am I like tagging a book with a given tag? Let's talk about that second thing. As a user, I'd like to tag a book with an existing tag so it's easier to find. And as a user, I'd also like to reverse that process. And maybe as a user, I'd like to edit an existing tag. So if somebody got a tag in there and it was like mistyped or something, or I noticed the punctuation wasn't, or the capitalization wasn't consistent. So notice in these three features, I've added creation, right? We can tag a book with a tag. That means that a tag assignment for joining that tag in that book would have to be created in the database. So that handles a little bit of creation. If I untagged a book, that means we're deleting a tag assignment record. We're removing a connection between a book and a given tag. So that's deletion, right? And if I found that a tag was misnamed, right? Somebody said like hopses instead of horses, and I wanted to go in there and change it, then I would be editing that tag name in that row under the tags table in the database. So a feature list like this, believe it or not, is an MVP for a project of this scope, right? I could add many more features, right? As a user, I'd like to add details for a whole new book. And I'd also like to tag that book as I'm creating details. So I could like from zero have a book that's already tagged with a bunch of tags. Sure, that would be nice. I don't know if I necessarily need to get it done in order to meet the requirements of this project. So if I had a feature like that, I'd put it down here at the bottom of the list. As a user, I'd like to add a book to the database and give it tags all in one go to have ultimate power. Yeah. So a feature like this is something that I'd love to get to once I've handled my higher priority features. My highest priority features are going to be the ones that show I can use Active Record to create resources, delete resources, display resources, and update existing resources, right? Once I've gotten through those features, then I can come around and do stuff that's in my quote-unquote icebox, right? Icebox is a term that gets used sometimes on software teams. It basically means in the context of like an agile project, a team might agree to get a certain scope of work done over a period of time. Any work that is a nice to have that exists outside of that scope that you've agreed on is in your like icebox or in your backlog. And it's a place that you put work that is nice to be able to get done if you have the time, but you're not going to pressure yourself too much to get it done because that's going to mess with your focus and your ability to deliver the clean features in the scope that's been predetermined. So now that we've got this list of user stories, I want to talk about a tool real quick that we can use to manage our user stories. One tool that I've used before, it's called Trello. And if we think of each of these user stories in terms of like a unit of communication, if we're building a project with a team, right, then a user story is my agreement as a programmer of a unit of work that I'm going to get done. So other people on the team might have questions about this story. Like, does this story involve me needing to create all of the tables that are involved? Or as I plan the time for this story, am I assuming that the tables have already been created, migrated, associated, tested, right? Because those are pretty big differences in how much I'll estimate, right? If I have to estimate the time to create the databases and get the data into them and make sure that they're connected and then also support this feature, then that might be a whole different unit of time than if I assume that I've got all that stuff done and then I just plunk in the work for adding this one method. So we could think about this whole thing in terms of like a card where we'd write notes like that, like, hey, so-and-so, I want to tag you into this conversation. I have a question about this user story and the scope of it. Are we sure that this time that you've estimated is long enough? And then on a team, you might be ping-ponging back and forth, just discussing under a card like this, right? So there's a tool that enables that kind of discussion or just note-taking if you're working solo. The tool looks like this. This is like my Trello stuff. If I wanted to make something new, I could have this app called Book Tagger. I could decide to have this nice little canyon can create a board here, right? So a lot of times teams will do this. I think you can see design doing this with Post-it notes all the time, right? They've got certain categories of work under verticals, and then Post-it notes are getting like plugged under those. So you can either categorize your work or you can stage your workflow using a tool like this. I want to talk about this. We have various lists here. Let's say I had a list that's called to do, and let's add another list called backlog. And let's put backlog to the left of to do, and then let's add another list called doing, and then let's add another one called done, right? This is a rudimentary way that we could plan out a whole project, right? We could first of all put every card, every user story in the backlog one by one. So I could say here, like as a user, I want to do this. I've already written this note, so it's easy to create this card. We move through here and do this for all of our cards. Once you get this information into a tool like this, Trello makes it pretty easy to like move your work forward or add little bits to it. And so I like to have this as a way to like visualize work without using too much paper, although a lot of people swear by Post-its because of the tactile nature of them, and I can't say they're wrong. Cool. Edit an existing tag name, and where's that backlog story? Cool. So if I think about to-do stuff here, right, these are all user stories, and what I can do is under like a given story, I can click, right, I can drag it, and I can put things where I'd like them to be. So I might decide that all of these things are in my to-do, and then I'm not going to move this one from my backlog over to my to-dos until all of these are over in the done column, right? That's a rule that I could put on my own work. If I double click on a card after I've created it, I can even put notes under this, right, to like guide my work further. So I can say like requires database created, tags added to DB, funny, scary, smart, some books added to DB, right? And then books tagged with combos of the 3 tags above. And then there needs to be interface where books are displayed. Interface may ask for tag name or number. I might not be sure about all this stuff, but I can like sketch notes about like how I'd plan doing my work. I can use Trello kind of as pseudocode for my workflow. And I don't want to spend too long in something like this, but I think that if I just spent, what, like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, like sketching out some ideas of what it's going to take to get this whole feature done, I think that's an appropriate amount of time to spend getting like a grocery list for steps that I need to do. And then once I know that these steps are going to be done in service of this card, I can move on to the next card and know that like, hey, books are already there, tags are already there, some tag assignments are already living in the database. So when I look at my next task, we want to view all the books in the database alphabetized by title, like if books by tag is done, books should be seated for this. And then what was the note I gave myself earlier? I was talking through it. I said like maybe a class method. Book dot by title. Something like that. And I might leave little notes for myself to like kind of plan my own work. If I'm working in a pair or in a group, like the tools like this becomes invaluable because I can collaborate with other people, I can invite them to use the same board, and then I can also make sure that like in this doing column that nobody has more than one thing at a time, right? For myself, I don't want to have more than one thing at a time. If I want to start working on this, I might drag this over into doing, and then when I come back to my project and like I can actually put it down at the end of the day now because I'm taking notes. I pick it up at the beginning of the day. I come back in. I check what's in my doing. I check in on the current status of that step and just kind of like get my head back on my shoulders. And then I'm back about it, just getting my work done. So a tool like this, I think, can be very, very useful. I think that especially in a workplace like this, where it's like pretty open and things move around and sometimes whiteboards get shared or moved around, that having a place that you can have it on your laptop is a nice thing. So yeah, without too much further ado, what have we got? We got a model domain decided on. I've got some user stories decided on. At this stage, by the way, by the time you get to your user stories well defined like this and can show me a schema that has tables and fields that are going to support those user stories, I'd like you to check in with myself or a coach just to make sure that you're going to be on the right track. Hopefully everybody will be able to check in before like mid-afternoon with something like that in terms of like their idea for their project and their user stories, because I hope that everybody can be getting into actually getting some data into databases, or at least migrating their database fields via Active Record by the end of the day, so that as you pick up on more Active Record skills by catching up and keeping up on labs, you can start implementing that stuff in your project, which is hopefully set up and raring to go by the end of the day. Cool. So how am I tracking progress? We talked about that in terms of Trello. I want to talk about this because we've got, oh no, I've only got 20 minutes left, right, in this lecture. And I feel like, oh, we haven't even gotten into Active Record stuff yet. So I might feel like I need to rush through things. You on this project this week might go like, oh, I've got to like power through this and I've got to catch up and I've got to hurry. I don't think we need to. I think that what we need to do is make sure that we don't spend a lot of time doing things that we don't need to do, right? That if we have like 3 days basically to put together features, that we don't want to spend half a day wondering what kind of features we're going to build. And we don't want to spend half a day worrying about how this information is supposed to come down from an API, right? So what is the smallest unit of work I can do in the quickest amount of time to push a concrete goal forward? If I've got that focus and I'm moving step by step through that, and I'm checking my workflow with a coach or a teacher as I go through the day, I think that that's how everybody's going to have a nice, smooth project process that doesn't involve a whole lot of feeling rushed or like you have to stack stuff on. I think that a lot of times when people have too much stuff in their to-do list and not enough stuff in their backlog, that's where that feeling of hurrying can come in. Notice here, I've got 5 features, right? I've got 2 reads and a CUD. That's it. That's enough with this kind of relationship space to do all the practicing I need to do. So in that note, I want to talk about what a black triangle is real quick. There was a video game development studio that was making like a game with a new engine and new hardware like system and a new graphics processing tool for like light and shading. And after they worked for like 3 whole weeks, they were cheering. And so the project manager came down the hall to check on why they were cheering so loud. And they're like high-fiving and like just singing and dancing around. And they look at the screen and they see a black triangle on like a blue background. And the project manager says like, I'm not sure why you're celebrating like this black triangle. And they said, well, we're celebrating because we've never rendered a black triangle through the hardware that we're using now, but we've got that. We've never lit this triangle with the lighting that we need to use on this project, but we've got that. This plugin that we're supposed to use to accelerate the physics is powering how this triangle is like sitting in space right now. We'd never hooked that up and we've got it. So what you see right now is just one black triangle, but this is proof that everything is all hooked up for us, and that now we're at a place that we can really get all of our work done. Like we've finally done all of the hookups to get this triangle. So what I'd like to do for the next 17 minutes is like demonstrate a black triangle. I want to create a command line interface. I want to get enough data in a database that we can approach not just having this user story done, but having it done in an MVP sort of way where it's viable and actually presents something to an end user. So I want to always think about like from the outside in as I'm coding this, not just do I feel good about like the code that I'm hiding under this method door, do I actually expose this? Can I open the windows and let the light in and show off what I'm working on? So TLDR, make it according to your plan as usable as quickly as you can. Ooh, this is better. That implies iambic pentameter a little bit more, I think, if I had a syllable in the first part. Okay, yeah. So let's see. I've got to make this first feature. I've already got it written down, right? So like I've already forgotten what I was trying to do, and that's fine. I can just look at my doing. So I want to view all the books that have been tagged funny or scary or smart so I can plan my reading based on my mood. So right now, I'm not even going to worry about the API, right? I can worry about the API this afternoon. We can dig into that and talk about how to get the resources from the web. I'm going to use Faker or some sort of similar strategy to just get some books seeded with the information that I care about in this project. So in this project right now, we've got our gem file. It includes pry and SQLite 3. I have a config, got an environment file here. Now this has adapter, database. One thing that I think I might get stung by is connecting to my database. So the first thing I'm going to test is, can I make a migration for a book? So let's do rake-t and see what our tasks are. Oh no, we can't find rake. Sure, let's do a bundle. You can say bundle instead of bundle install. It's like an alias for the other. So I had just cloned this project down. Now you can see all this green because I'm in a different Ruby version on this project file. So I had to actually go and get these gems. Now let's see if we have rake tasks. Cool. Let's do a rake db create migration. And we'll name it create books. So that creates a migration file in the db folder. And in here, I can use that create table command. Create table books. Do t. And we'll say t.string for title. And t.string for, I think Google had it as authors. I don't see why authors would be a problem as opposed to author. I'm just planning on storing a string here, right? I might have to think more strategically about a many-to-many relationship if authors was going to be its own table, but I've decided it can just be a field on book because I'm keeping my model domain really small and simple, just about books and their tags. So I'll have authors just be a string on book and not look back. And then we'll have another description field. By the way, if I say something like t.timestamps, it gives me two date time fields on it called created at and updated at, which are managed accordingly by SQL, which is a nice thing to have if I was ever going to arrange something by time, but not super necessary all the time. But anyways, let's see if I can actually run this migration. Rake db create. Do we have a database file? Yeah, see, now it gives me a problem. Adapter not specified, development database is not configured. Oh no, that's fine. Here's what I'll do. I have another project. And in this project, I had that file set up the way that I liked, so I'm just gonna harvest it from there. Sometimes you have to do something specific for your computer and then you just like copy that mode. So I have this database.yaml thing that I had going on. I'm just gonna create the same thing in my config, new file, database.yaml, add the stuff in here, and then there were also changes made to the config environment file, which I'm just going to bring in. YAML load database, establish connection. I think this is how I had it. Yeah. Bring this in there. Cool. And yeah, now we'll see if it works.
Can you do?
Yeah.
Are we gonna have to do all of that part?
That database stuff, if you're having the adapter not specified thing, just ask. I can help you get that hooked up. I don't consider that a ball that you're supposed to be hitting. So if you're having anything in terms of like setting up the database connection, that's not like intended by curriculum to be a thing that you have to struggle through or like muddle through. Their intention is for you to be able to just jump in and do active record stuff right away because it's supposed to feel like how easy it is to set up Rails. I don't have to do this extra setup stuff for the Rails app. It's just my active record hookups, and so I don't expect anybody else to have to sit through that too. So yeah, if you're slogging, ask somebody for help and we'll get you up to speed on that. Let's see what happens now. Can I create this database? Yeah, totally, right? I've made this change on my computer a bunch of times. I know that it works for me. Now I should be able to do like a rakedb migrate because I have a database there. Things are going gangbusters so far. I really like it. Cool. So I've got books. Like maybe the first thing I can do is like just get some books into the database. So if I'm not going to use the API yet, then if I've got this schema to be my guide, title, authors, description for books, as well as the timestamps that we put in, great. So let's go into console. And let's see if I say book.all, uninitialized constant book. Oh sure, I've forgotten something. So we've got this lib folder. This lib folder is going to basically be where our models live. Hello, hello, tour people. And the models, let's make one for a book. Book.rb. The table is called books, so the class should be capital book. What does book inherit from? Does anybody remember?
Active record base.
Sweet. Active record base. That should be enough to shake that uninitialized constant thing loose. Let's look for book.all again. Yeah, select books from books, so it knows that like the class book is connected to the table books. So now I should be able to say just book and get a list of its attributes. And so I can say book.new, title, I don't know,
Hey, dude,
yeah.
there's the DB create migration that makes the migration for you. Is
Mhm.
there an equivalent for the class? Like,
There is in Rails, but there's not in this, because the idea is that you should be able to practice like just writing that class and thinking about how that class connects with Active Record every time. When we get to Rails, you'll have a generator for that, but we just don't have generators for it right now. It's like an elbow grease building character kind of thing. I think it's Benjamin Hoff wrote this. Description. Something like that. Cool. Let's save that. Let's make another book. So now instead of new, is there a way that I can just automatically save this once the object gets made? Create, right? Create is new plus save, all in one. So if I say book.create, title, cool. So we've got a couple of books now saved, right? At this point, I might decide that like I don't like writing book information in, right? I might be thinking, how can I use like a tool to like streamline this process? One thing I could do is I could add Faker to my gem file. And then I could go to my DB and I could create a new file called seeds.rb. And here is a place that I could use to add data to my database, so I don't have to just add record after record by hand. Here I can use Ruby, right? And I can use what I know about collections and enumerables to really streamline my work, and maybe I could add like 50 books in the next 3 minutes. That's my goal, literally. 50 books in 3 minutes. First of all, I need to know what Faker does. Faker gem. Faker Ruby, Faker, a library for generating fake data. This is what I want to know about. Oh look, they have generators for books. They have book, Faker book, book title, book author. Oh cool, so then we have this like genre thing, title, author. I'm not sure about like sentences, maybe if we could get a sentence, but there is something called book.title and there is book.author, and maybe there's a fun one, default blockchain, I don't know. Games, media, movies. If there were quotes, that would be great. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yeah, there is a quote. Cool. So I'm just going to bring this over. We have books title, books author, and movies Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Marvin quote. Together we're going to use those things to create books. So what if I said like 100.times do, and then within this I said book.create, title is Faker, books, title, author is Faker, books, author. Oops, I'm off the screen, sorry y'all. And the description is Faker, movies, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Marvin quote. Yeah, let's see if this works. Let's exit out of Pry. I want to do another bundle install because I added Faker to my gem list. And so I should see Faker get added to the list of things. Yep, using Faker 2.2.1. And now if I look at my rake tasks again, this file that I've created in DB, which is seeds.rb, will respond to the call of rake db seed. It's literally going to run this file. The command under the hood is just ruby db/seeds.rb. So I'll say rake db seed. Let's see if I wrote this syntax correctly. Probably not. Undefined method for faker books class. So I think that I tried to memorize something that I read instead of like keeping it on the screen, and it burned me, which I've done that before. Oh yeah, because it's not under books. I think it's under book. So it's book.title, book.author. Not, yeah, booze. That's what I get every time I try to remember something wrong. All right, let's try this again. Rake DB seed. Ooh, what do we get? Unknown attribute author for book. Oh, sure, because it's talking about the book class, right? And I said author, but I should have said authors, because when I put it in the migration, I left room for there to be multiple authors under this. So I think that's why we ran into the error that time. Let's do this again. Rake DB seed. Nothing. Well, hang on. Let's see what we've got. I mean, no news is good news sometimes, right? His Dark Materials by Miss Renato Senger. Frequent hearses. This is good. We got these descriptions, like they're all like quoted out. This like feels like kind of book-ish data, right? At this point, check it out. I might have had a goal, as I stated at the beginning, to actually pull my data from the Google Books API. When I'm ready to do that, I can just drop this data and then just reseed with Google API data. But for now, without having to have solved my API problem going into this, I've got table data that I can use with the rest of my app, right? So the last thing I'd like to talk about is just a review of how we can associate things together, because like I wrote up here on the whiteboard, a tag assignment can belong to the tag that it has on it, and it can also belong to the book that it refers to, right? And because of that, a book can have many of those tag assignments, and so can a tag. So let's get those tables involved. Let's create a table. Rake DB create migration. Name equals create tags. And then we'll also create tag assignments. That'll be our join. We'll hop over to Atom. We'll check out these. We'll do a create table. And we'll just have a t.string, which is a name. That's what's on the whiteboard, right? I'm just going off memory here, but it's I've done this schema before. And then create table tag assignments. I like tag assignments, by the way, way more than I like a table called like tag lists, because each row is not a list of tags. It's just one tag and one book, right? One tag being assigned to one book. So I always name the table according to what one single row will be, and that rule does not break just because we got into a join. So we'll say t.integer, tag ID, and t.integer, book ID. So if I had this stuff in here, and I also had models, how would we make sure that these database tables could be connected with one another using active record keywords in these models? How do we basically say that this tag assignment has these foreign keys which map to a book's or a tag's primary key from within this class? We could use has many and belongs to. We could use our active record association keywords. So an active record association is just a rule that we write into a class. And as long as that class is an active record class and associated with a table, when we write has many or belongs to, active record goes off to the races making some assumptions about tables and field names and how they connect with a join. And that helps active record to figure out what's the SQL syntax it's going to use to make that association come true in the object world. So by that I mean if a tag assignment belongs to a given tag, that means that there's going to be a tag ID that points to a certain tag with that ID. And I would use a join, right? If I was going to look up a tag with a tag assignment, I'd say join on tag.id or tags.id equals tag assignments.tagid, because those two fields would link up. To get active record to say that, from a tag assignments perspective, I can say belongs to tag. And I can also say belongs to book. Oops. And the reason is, active record assumes when I say something belongs to something else, that the name I've given it that it belongs to is going to be that underscore ID. So it assumes there's going to be a field on tag assignment called tag underscore ID. There's going to be a field called book underscore ID. It also assumes that a table with this name pluralized exists. Right? So not only does it assume that tag assignment dot tag ID is a thing, but that there's also a table called tags. And then on that table you have a primary key, and that's connected to this tag ID field. And it uses all those assumptions to make its join query, right? So if I were to say tag assignment dot tag, active record would go, hey, let's select start from tags where the ID equals this tag assignment's tag ID, limit 1, because that's how belonging should work. And it puts that together. From the other side of things, a tag would have many tag assignments, and so would a book. Assumption being here that, oh, there must be a table called whatever I say in this has many. There must be has many tag assignments. Oh, that must be a table in the database. And if tag assignments is a table in the database, the foreign key back to me must derive from this class name, because it's a has many. There must be something called tag ID on the tag assignments table. So active record makes the same exact assumption on both sides of this, but it makes it from different information based on the context of the class that it starts in. And a book would also have many tag assignments. Does anybody know how a book has many tags?
Through tag assignment?
Oh, very good. Funny thing about through. Think about through the looking glass. Like, think about going into a whole different world. If I say has many tags, and then I say through tag assignments, I just finished telling you that with this has many, it makes assumptions about a table existing called tag assignments and a foreign key on that table, right? When you say through, active record stops thinking about tables at all. What it starts thinking about is existing pre-written associations that you've already written and the table relationships that those imply. So you could say that I wrote a next door neighbor association here because it's two tables that are directly linked by one of these chicken foot lines on the database schema. But here, we're going through multiple of those, right? We can't have a next door neighbor relationship between books and tags. What does have a next door neighbor relationship is the thing we're talking about with this association name, right? So tag assignments is going to point to this association when it's a through option. That association implies a given model. When we go to that model, we can see, does this model know about an association called tag or tags? And it's this tag assignment's association with tag, which is actually getting tapped into when a book has many tags through tag assignments. Literally, we're going through the tag assignment model to find an association called tags to satisfy what book wants. Because the book knows how to get to its tag assignments, but only the tag assignment knows how to get through to something called tag. So when we say has many tags through tag assignments, another way to say that is book, through what it knows about the tag assignment model, through that named association, will have access to the tag assignment's association with tags and be able to use that tag assignment's association to get to the tags that it's associated with. We'll see the sequel come out. At this point, it's a little after 10:30. I want to talk more about this association stuff when we get in there, and I'd like to see how close we could get to actually getting that black triangle feature up by the end of the day. But the first thing I'd like us to do while we still have daylight before lunch is to think about what exact model domain you'd like to use with your project. Remember, you can keep it quite small, just one many-to-many relationship will suffice. That other relationships in your schema can live in the icebox outside of MVP just as much as features do. So you can plan out any kind of project you want, and if you're having trouble thinking about how you can get that down to a nicely, tightly scoped MVP size of features, talk to one of us, and we'll be able to help you make sure that you're not underselling or overselling yourself. Scoping things and estimating things is one of the hardest things to do, so please reach out and ask for help if you're not feeling certain on stuff, because everybody's going to be dealing with a huge amount of uncertainty, and if you personally perceive that you have it, then yeah, it's probably best to be on the safe side and just get a second set of eyes on your ideas. But yeah, don't be afraid to pull whiteboards up or grab mini whiteboards or whatever you need to do to visually sketch stuff out. I think that having pen to paper is one of the most important things you could do this morning for your planning and approach. Cool, cool? Lots to cover. We'll talk more about active record specifics this afternoon, but this has been a little bit about how to get started on the project. Thanks.